at 120 mile an hour and I've got no time to react, so I hit the back of the car, woke up from my coma on Wednesday and I was a double amputee. Yeah, I'd lost my legs, but I'd equally gained the opportunity to still continue living. If you work hard with your recovery, your rehabilitation, everything like that, you'll still be able to be independent. And it just changed my mindset. Rather than thinking, oh, what have I lost because of this accident? It's what have I still got?
Welcome to Under the Surface podcast. Together with Original Penguin and Calm, the campaign against living miserably, we're on a mission to challenge the stigma surrounding mental health. Our journey takes us to an important place from our guests' lives, which has helped them navigate through tough times. Tune in as we hear from voices in music, sport, and entertainment who are ready to reveal the private battles behind their public personas. Join us as we go under the surface. This podcast contains references to suicide and issues which some people may find distressing. Search Campaign Against Living Miserably for support and advice. Welcome back to Series 4 of Under the Surface. Now, you might spot a change. Yes, we are on the road for this series, meeting guests in locations linked to their story. We joined Billy in his unbelievable man cave at his house, right by the main road. You can even hear the cars. Hello, welcome back to another episode of Under the Surface podcast. Delighted to say on the pod today, Billy Monger, an inspiration and someone that we've wanted to get on for a while. Billy, thank you very much for coming on. How are you?
Thanks for having me.
First question, we are taking the podcast on the road, as our viewers and listeners know now. Great location. Tell us where we are and why this is important to you here.
Yeah, this is my sort of space away from my house at home. So we live on an old farm. So this is one of the outbuildings that during COVID, me and Dad first converted into a gym, and then we decided, well, it doesn't need to just be a gym, and now it's the man cave. Yeah, so.
And it has got everything in here, isn't it? You've got simulators behind us, you've got merch on the walls, a pool table outside.
We've got everything. Yeah, it got us through a fair bit of lockdown, so it worked out pretty well.
And what I like the most, obviously you've got a lot of your achievements behind us and stuff, but there's a Spurs crest there because you, of course, like me, you're a big Spurs fan.
Yeah, I am a Spurs fan. Yeah, big Spurs fan. So no, and Spurs have been very good to me, actually. I've got a few bits of Spurs merch sort of littered all throughout the man cave and my house. So.
Love that, top club. And also, logistically for me, we're only half an hour from my house, so it works on a lot of levels.
There we go.
Loads to dissect with you, because obviously your story, you've got an amazing positive outlook on life, and we're going to get into your story and everything. So before we talk about your links with this charity and mental health and everything, I suppose take us back to your early days and growing up and what your passions were as a kid.
Yeah, so my early days were from the age of 6 years old onwards were basically spent where I'd be at school during the week, and then it would be weekends at racetracks, because I did my first ever go-karting experience when I was 6. My dad actually bought me that go-kart that I raced when I was 6 when I was 2 years old.
Even though you couldn't race it then?
I couldn't race it until I was 6, so he was pretty keen for me to have a go. He actually took me in my baby seat in the passenger seat of his van to the guy's house where he bought the go-kart from, and the guy went, "Oh, who's your go-kart for?" He said, "Oh, it's my son, he's in the front seat," and he went past the window with this go-kart. I went, "He can't drive that." He's not until he's 6 years old. So yeah, no, I've been doing it ever since, and I just absolutely fell in love with it.
What sparked that passion then? Obviously your dad got you into that, but was it something that you enjoyed straight away, or were you sort of pushed in that direction? Like how did that sort of come about?
It's always hard to tell exactly the point where I fell in love with it, where it was my obsession, but it can't have been long. I reckon by the time I'd done it maybe 4 or 5 times, maybe when I was coming up to 7, because at first I'd do it we'd go out once a month. It would be not that regular of a thing. And then by the time I was 7, it was I'm shaking my dad's feet at the end of his bed on a Saturday morning going, "Dad, we're going go-karting." And so out of I definitely had that passion for it and really enjoyed it, but it came an obsession quite early on.
Really, yeah. You mentioned your dad a lot already early on in this podcast, so tell us about your relationship with your parents.
Yeah, I mean, my dad, like I say, that was our go-karting racing. That was our thing that we'd do together. That was my dad's passion when he was younger. He would race with his mates, and they called their little race team, it wasn't anything serious, but boys in the barn, because effectively they had a setup like this in my dad's garage, and they would just tinker with cars. They loved being mechanical, and then a lot of the time my dad was doing sort of oval racing, on the weekends, and they would have to know they'd have to finish in like the top 5 to afford the fuel to get home from the racetrack. So like serious like budget stuff. Yeah. And then my dad got me into it, and it became our thing. Like every weekend we were pretty much spent together at a racetrack, and Dad loved seeing me enjoying myself out on the track. He's very mechanically minded, and we just found that thing that we like doing together.
I've heard you speak in your story about your parents' work ethic a lot in other sort of podcasts and interviews that you've done. Is that something that you got from them quite early on, would you say? Yeah,
I think so. Yeah, it just translates when you're just around like people like that. Like my mum, she's a makeup artist in like the film space. So she'd be getting up at 5:30 in the morning to get there before the actors do, make them up, and then be working all day. Then she's got to take all their makeup off. She'd be back at 8:30 p.m. Yeah. So like when me and my sister were younger and we were at school, during the week we wouldn't actually get a lot of quality time to spend with my mum because she'd be busy working, and that was just her job and the hours it took up. But then the weekends, even though she'd worked her socks off all week and she was knackered, she'd still be coming to watch me racing, and she'd still
love that.
So like I just was been surrounded by like my mum and dad have just worked really hard to give me and my sister like every opportunity that we could ask for.
How important was that as well, actually? Because I remember from my childhood seeing my dad watch me play football and stuff. It meant such a lot to me as a young kid having that, because that they support you in loads of ways, but that on the touchline or on the racetrack side, was that big for you as well, seeing them there?
Yeah, massively. Like you, as a kid, you always want to make your parents proud.
I totally agree.
100%. So whenever I'd have a bad race, and my dad would be a little bit down, like you'd feel that. But then when you'd win, like I remember those moments of like, you'd go out there, you'd have a good weekend, and then we'd be like driving home in like our little camper van or in the van, and we'd have the music blasting, and we'd be like, cheering all the way home, and like a 2-hour car journey just went by like that because we'd had a good weekend together.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, those are the things that a lot of the time I like think back to and think like that was wicked.
I'm exactly the same, actually. I remember when my dad used to watch me play football saying, "Did you see my goal, or did you see that?" Like craving that. I hope you saw it, and he'd say yes even if he didn't or whatever. Yeah. But it's just I can totally relate to that. Obviously, I didn't get to the level sporting wise that you have. I mean, very much Sunday league with me, but
still, it doesn't matter, does it? It's just that feeling of that you've done yourself and your parents proud. I love that.
Let's talk about when you started racing competitively then. What sort of age were you? Because I mean, getting a go-kart age 2, that's quite young compared to a lot of drivers. But when did you start racing competitively?
Yeah, so I first go-karted when I was 6. And I'd say by the time I was 8, I was doing sort of like regional competitions. Right. Sort of, a lot of the karting scene in the UK, in the south, is based around Kent. There's tracks like Butmore Park and Bayford Meadows and Lydd. So there were like 3 local tracks for me within like a couple of hours of home.
Right, got you.
And which is local in racing terms, because there's not loads of racing tracks all over the place. And that would be like our sort of monthly routine. It would be one weekend I'd be racing at Butmore, the next weekend Bayford, then Lydd, and then I'd have one weekend off a month. And normally me and my dad would be out testing or doing something like practicing. And so that was when I was about 8, and then I started winning local championships, stuff like that, when I was 9, and I was British champion by the time I was 11 years old. So,
incredible.
Yeah.
What was it like racing competitively at the age of 8, you said? I mean, were you nervous? Were you thriving on that? Because that's such a young age to be racing competitively, I think, in my mind. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously when you're younger, like, it's competitive, but you're still a kid, so there's still like, racing competitively, it wasn't that serious at like probably the age of 8-9 years old. It wasn't that serious. Right. Like I'd race, you'd all give it your best on the track, but then me and my dad would stay at the track in a camper van, and like in the evening, me and all my mates that I would race with, we'd be playing football or going around the paddock on our scooters. Yeah. So like, it was like, it's like a travelling like sort of circus almost. Like everyone's there, we're all, competitive, we all want to win. And then as soon as the racing's finished, the dads, they're fixing up the go-karts and, just hanging out together, getting the barbecue on, and me and the other kids would be like just playing football.
So you actually make a lot of them that you're competing with effectively.
Yeah. So then when it gets more serious, that obviously the older you get, the higher ranking you get to the British Championships, and everyone's, it's already in motorsport, you know, it's costing money.
Yeah.
And, you know, you can see that and feel that effect slightly,
Can
even
you?
more so nowadays, I'd say.
And being, well, you said British champion, right?
Yeah.
At the age of 11.
Yeah.
What was that moment like? Because, I mean, thinking back to being an 11-year-old, you're still so young, and to actually have that title at that age, what did that do to you at the time, would you say?
I think it gave me a lot of confidence that basically this thing that I loved so much, I was actually good at as well.
Yeah.
You know, because sometimes, and it's not a bad thing if you love doing something and you're not the best at it.
Yeah, great point.
But being a kid, like, and especially with the way racing worked for me, where it's like you spending your weekends at racetracks. So like friends from school that I would see all throughout the week, they'd go and have birthday parties at the weekend, but I'd be busy racing.
So you were actually sacrificing things at that young of an age?
Yeah, I wasn't able to go to all these social, you know, things that with my friends from school, and luckily they were very supportive. But I think, yeah, racing was like that space where I gained a lot of confidence. You meet lots of new people because you're going to different racetracks. Some people only compete at some compete at others. So I met a lot of people. I found this thing that I loved doing, and all of a sudden I was good at it, and it just breeded, I think, like this sense of like inner confidence that, you know, if I stick with this, I can, you know, do something here.
It's interesting you said that, because obviously you said the fact that it's your passion and you love doing that, but also I'm gaining that it actually helped you grow as a person as well in terms of your confidence and what it did for you. So it's amazing how many sportsmen and women say that. It's not just what they get from a sort of passion perspective, but how it shapes them as an individual. And you're saying you felt that at the age of 11 even? Yeah,
definitely, because you go back to school after the weekend where it's a completely different crowd of people.
Right.
And, you know, racing is a very rare sport, so it's hard to have conversations with people that aren't in that space about it, because you just don't get it. Like, you're not exposed to it. You know, all my mates would be playing football or tennis or basketball, like they've not driven go-karts before competitively. They don't know what that whole, you know, atmosphere and experience is like. But yeah, just being able to go back when I started winning things, and when I was like building that confidence and being able to say, oh yeah, no, I won the first round of the British Championships that weekend, even though they didn't get it, they were like, oh wow, that's awesome. And like, you know, you just felt, you know, good about it.
Yeah. I got invited to a lot of go-kart parties as a kid. Did you ever have a moment where a friend of yours invited you to a go-kart party at the age of 12? Were you just like lapping everyone all the time?
Yeah, they got fed up of me pretty quick.
Did invite you?
Yeah, I reckon I've been to about 5 kids' parties and go-karting, and yeah.
You won them all, right?
Yeah, the track record's good.
Played 5, won 5, yeah. You mentioned finances there. I wanted to just touch upon that, because it is like football. Anyone can go to a park with a ball and play. It's a very accepting sport, and accessible sport, I would say, to a lot of people. Formula 1 and Formula 2 and all of the racing that's attached to it, I'm gathering finances are of critical importance at a young age.
Yes, it's massive, and it's only got, since, you know, I started go-karting in 2007, and even in the last, now 17 years, it's dramatically even more, you know, less accessible.
Even in that time frame?
Even in that time frame, yeah. Because when I started in 07, 08, me and my dad would go in the back of his transporter van. We'd have duvet, pillows in the back, and the go-kart would come out of the van. We'd camp there, barbecue, we'd stay in the van. Like, it was like, you know, kind of like camping away from the actual racing. And it was, like I say, when you're younger, it wasn't about spending loads of money and being the best, but eventually money becomes a factor into it. Well, nowadays, you know, kids watch, you know, Formula 1 on the telly, and they decide they want to do go-karting and stuff, and they're spending like hundreds of thousands of pounds like to do top level go-karting. You know, you're still a kid, and they're spending that much money. Like me and my dad would have never been able to afford that sort of lifestyle. So it's sad in a lot of ways to see like just the way that the sport has become a little bit more elitist than probably when I was doing it. You feel like you get less and less of those dad and lad setups.
Right.
You know, you've got professional karting teams that you're paying people to mechanic your go-kart for you and to prepare it and everything like that from like 8 years old.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's incredible hearing the complexities of that, because obviously I'm someone that is aware of that, but not in the level of detail. And when you're saying there's mechanics for go-karts and stuff, you just imagine just is amplified the higher level that you get into. And it brings me nicely onto the next sort of stage of your career, really. Getting into F4, how did that come about?
So yeah, the transition from go-karting to car racing is like a big step up in like a racing driver's career, because you have a lot of people, and I know a lot of very good, talented drivers in go-karts that got into car racing, and for whatever reason it didn't click. Like,
Why do you think that was? You said whatever reason, but what were sort of common reasons for that?
I think,
would you say?
Go-karting is very good. It teaches you as a racing driver, teaches you the fundamentals, like, you know, how to overtake, racing lines, sort of how to drive in the wet with low grip. Like there's a lot of like little, like the fundamentals of if you're going to be a quick driver or not. It teaches you all of those. But then you get into a car and like it just, the levels of knowledge that you need to be able to perform increases. You've got to know about how weight transfer happens. You, instead of driving this 60 kilogram, 70 kilogram go-kart, you've got this few hundred kilograms underneath you. And yeah, there's a lot that goes into car racing where you don't have to consider it in go-karts. The go-karts, you know, it's not geared or anything like that. It's two pedals, a steering wheel. Yeah. It's the fundamentals are quite basic, but to be good at it, you need that skill. So that's what it's good for. But yeah, I knew a lot of people that were good in go-karts, winning British Championships, World Championships, and it didn't translate to car racing because they couldn't quite make the step of knowledge when you get into cars. And then equally the other way around, kids that I raced against where you thought they're good, but I don't know if they're the next Lewis Hamilton, and then they'd get into a car and you go, where did that come from? Like it just clicked for whatever reason. So yeah, it's a strange one how some people it works for them, that jump, and some people it doesn't, but that is just the route of progression. So it kind of, it eliminates some people in terms of the talent pool because they just, for whatever reason, can't get on top of that sort of thing. And but car racing for me was obviously a big step in my career. At that point, when I moved into F4, I was 16 years old, and I'd won a couple of British Championships in go-karting, a couple of World Championship races. I was teammates with George Russell in go-karts, and I've raced like Lando Norris, and I've raced quite a few of the F1 grid now. They've all ended, you know, up in that sort of path. But yeah, it's at that point I knew it was racing. Being a racing driver was the career that I wanted to go after anyway.
There was no alternative for you. That was it
at
for
that
you.
point I was very one-dimensional with, like, you'd be at school and they'd be talking about universities and colleges and like, what are you going to do next? And they'd be like, no, I'm going to be a racing driver. So I'd kind of set and mapped out that for me. So it meant a lot when I made that step, because it was like, there's a little bit of added pressure there. Yeah, because I've put all my eggs into this basket. I was still going to school and doing what I needed to do, but I wasn't invested in it, and I wasn't plotting my future according to it. Sport was going to be my future. And yeah, I remember getting behind the wheel of an F4 car for the first time and absolutely loved it.
Did you?
Yeah, it was...
No anxiety or fears or nerves? It was quite a straightforward transition for you, was it, at the time?
There was definitely anxiety and fear, but I think it related to the pressure that maybe I was putting on myself because I knew how much I wanted it. Yeah. I think then that's where the anxiety and pressure comes into play, because you don't want to fail. You don't want to be someone who can't handle that level of the sport. You want to be able to make that next step up. So I think it was all more pressure. A lot of it was pressure that I put on myself, but equally there was financial strain on the family at that point, because it was self-funded. So I was having to go out and find sponsors to raise money. So at the age of 16, you know, you're still a kid, but I'm going out there and speaking to, you know, businesses about, you know, getting their investment, putting stickers on the car, getting them down for races, giving them tickets, all of this stuff.
And you doing that yourself, sorry?
Me, alongside my mum and my dad, you know, us as a family would, but a lot of it was down to me to, you know, do presentations, PowerPoint presentations, and to make a little CV for, you know, why people should sponsor me and stuff like that. Like, when you add up all those little different, you know, strains of where you could get that pressure and anxiety from, like, it was definitely there. But my safe space away from all of that was when I was driving and I was behind the wheel of the car. So before I got in the F4 car, I remember sitting there going, oh my God, it's an F4 car. It's worth, this car's worth £100,000. I'm 16 years old, like this is like mind boggling. And you think about those things. And as soon as it's driving, it's just like, did everything completely went out the window. And it's just me driving this car. And it's muscle memory. It's what I've been doing since I was a kid. That gave me my safe space.
Yeah, that's incredible. It's amazing when you said that. It's a £100,000 car at the age of 16. That's before the legal driving age of to drive on the road. And obviously, most people's first cars are worth a lot less than that. So it puts into perspective the pressure from a financial perspective. The age of 16 then, because we're going to come on to what happened when you were 17. I think, obviously, you'll know where we're going with the conversation. But what level were you at the age of sort of 16, 17 when you were in there? Give us a sort of insight into what you were winning and who you were racing against and stuff, because you name dropped some big names earlier.
So the first year of F4 I did pretty well. I got a few podiums. I think I finished like 7th or 8th in the British Championship in my first year. And normally in sort of car racing, the way it sort of works is when you make that step up, the first year is always a bit of a learning year because it is a big transition. And then the second year of the championship is when the top drivers win the championship. Like they'll be right up the sharp end. You can't, if you're finishing 5th or below in F4 in your second year, then that's a sign that maybe you're not ready for the next step beyond that. So after finishing 7th or 8th in the F4 British Championship in my first year, that was the goal, was to win the F4 British Championship in year 2, which was 2017. It was going pretty well. The second year when I turned 17, and we'll obviously come on to the accident and everything around that. But I was racing a lot of top drivers in there. Logan Sargent, who's been a Formula 1 driver for this year. Oscar Piastri, F1 race winner now. So, your top names from around the world as well. It's called the F4 British Championship. Sometimes that doesn't give it the justice. Oscar Piastri's from Australia, Logan Sargent's from America. It's like the top guys were coming and racing in that championship. And I've gone on to do great things. And I was, in and amongst them.
So you're in and amongst some incredible drivers there. And it must, just on that as well, must make your parents very proud, that like sort of justification of all the hours that they've spent and the money that they've spent as well, seeing you do so well at that time.
Yeah, I think so. Like we didn't just, it wasn't all about results for us as a family. Like we loved going racing together. So like me and my dad loved, seeing me out on track. And obviously it always helps when you do well, but I think even if I wasn't doing that well, apart from the financial strain, which would be there regardless, my dad just loved seeing me drive and doing my best. My mum and my sister would come and support. My mum would be cooking all the meals for us all in the camper van, and my sister would come along. And at times, she was a teenager. She didn't want to be there in them. Like really, she wanted to be hanging out with her own mates. But equally, she made new friends at the racetrack, and it was like a real family like setup we had, which wasn't the same as everyone I was going up against. And I think that's what made it more special for us.
I like that. So things are going so well for you at this point. You've mentioned some of the drivers and some of the awards that you've won. You then suffered a pretty horrific crash. I don't know in how much detail you want to or prepared to talk about this, but can I ask you, if you don't mind me asking, your memories of that incident? And for people that don't know what happened, I know a lot of people will be familiar with your story, but for those who might not be, just sort of explain what happened in that moment.
Yeah, so my accident happened when I was 17. It was the second round of the British Championship in F4 in year 2. Race weekend 1 had gone really well. Had like 3 podiums out of 3 races and was right up there in the championship. I think I was like 3rd in the championship after the first weekend of the year. So a good solid start for where we wanted to be. And then we were going to Donington Park, which was actually one of my favourite circuits. Absolutely loved the nature of the circuit's really high speed, fast and flowing. That was, the sort of style of driving that I felt really suited me. And the race weekend itself was like any other, like it wasn't any different. Woke up on the Sunday morning. I think I was starting like 6th on the grid for the race that we had on the Sunday. We'd already had 2 races. I'd had a podium in one of those. So again, it was like the streak was going good. And then it was tricky conditions for a racing driver, the trickiest you can get, because we were on the grid lining up for the race and we're all on slick tyres. Right. And then it starts to rain. obviously when you drive your road car, the tyres are made for dry and wet conditions. In a race car, you've got dry tyres and you've got wet tyres.
Right.
So when you're on dry tyres and it rains, the tyres aren't built for that.
No.
And all of a sudden it really tests your skill as a driver. But they were actually conditions that I loved driving in. And that was because, you know, some people might say cruelly, but I really didn't think it at the time. My dad, when I was younger in a go-kart, sometimes in the rain on a test day, would put me out on slick tyres.
Oh, really?
To develop like your sense of feel for the grip underneath you. Effectively, as a racing driver, you feel a lot of stuff through your bum. I know it sounds it's a weird way to describe it, but that's where you feel where the grip is and where you're able to then carry speed through corners. It's all, you feel it from underneath you. And when you're in those conditions, you need that feel more than ever. So I was looking forward to the race. I thought it gave me a good chance of being right up the sharp end. And the start of the race didn't go well. There was a couple of drivers in front of me spun off, and I actually had to spin off to avoid their crash. So it meant I dropped, I think I was one from last. And then at that point, it's just, sometimes in a race, you'd feel a little bit of pressure if you were at the front end. You don't want to make a mistake. But whenever you're in that situation where it's like, okay, in your mind, you've already written off the race because you've had this unfortunate thing that's happened at the start. It's like, okay, I've got nothing to lose now. So it was like, head down, boom, I'm coming for you one by one. I'm going to make my way through. That's what I was doing. And then, unfortunately, there was an incident because of those tricky conditions further on up the road towards the front of the grid where a driver had spun out because of the conditions on sort of the crest of a hill. There's a slight uphill section at Donington. He'd spun out, he ended up on the racing line. So that's where naturally the fastest way through the corner is on the racing line. So he'd ended up on the racing line. And I came out of the corner at the bottom of the hill. I was going up the hill and I had two cars that were side by side ahead of me. And obviously in a single seater F4 car, you're actually positioned really low to the ground. So in a car, in a normal car, you're sat quite upright, quite above the road. You've got a better sense of vision. Perspective, yeah. In a single seater car, you're lower to the ground and you can only see sort of the tops of the tyres. You can't see much below that. And anyway, we come over the crest of the hill, the two cars in front of me that I'm just worried about overtaking last minute, they see this car move either side, and at 120 mile an hour, there's a stationary car in front of me and I've got no time to react. So I hit the back of the car at 120, everything sort of comes to a halt. And I was awake for about 45 minutes after that accident. So I was awake for it all. And then the doctors put me into an induced coma in order to extract me from the car. And then I got airlifted to hospital. So yeah, this was, early afternoon Sunday. And then I woke up from my coma on Wednesday and I was a double amputee. Those surgeries had happened whilst I was put under.
Wow. Listening to that story, it's just, so much for you to dissect at the time, I imagine. When that happened and you wake up then, what is your initial reaction? Because I'm guessing you don't remember anything from the Sunday to the Wednesday.
Yeah, it just felt like a long sleep, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah, I was in an induced coma. It just felt like a long sleep. Fundamentally, because I've been awake for 45 minutes in the car, and as a racing driver, you have crashes. I'd been, racing for, at that point, 10 years. I'd had crashes in go-karts where I'd broken my wrist in a couple places, and you're used to that feeling of, there's a chance I can crash here. But equally, as a racing driver, you don't think about it. Those risks you're taking and the speeds you're doing, it's just part of what you do. But the thing that sort of alerted me to the fact that this incident could be more serious was just like being able to see around me when I was in the cockpit, like the doctors' faces. You see that concern of like, they know it's a big crash and that they're worried about me. And obviously the way the cars are designed, I couldn't really see, but like you can't see much below your waist because the cockpit's quite narrow and dark. So I couldn't really tell what the damage was done. The doctors initially, when they spoke to my parents, who were obviously very upset back in the paddock, waiting to hear the news about what was going on. They told them that they thought I'd broken both my legs, because obviously they couldn't tell at the time until they got me out of the car what the damage was. And I knew it was serious. I didn't think obviously that I'd become a double amputee, but I knew it was, I was looking at, a decent stint out of the cockpit. And so when I woke up in hospital a few days after, and you sort of look down and see the covers and know that, that then your legs aren't there anymore. And then I got told the news, like, it was upsetting, but I think subconsciously, in a weird way, I'd sort of semi come to terms with the fact that something serious was...
At the first moment that you got told the news and you looked down, that you said you'd almost come to terms with it almost immediately?
Not come to terms with it completely, but I guess I wasn't under the illusion that it was like I was okay.
Sorry,
I knew that there was something serious that has happened here. And then when they told me, I guess because of that, me knowing that something serious had happened, it wasn't this huge shock that I couldn't believe that it had happened in a weird way. Obviously, there still was shock there, but it wasn't like this news that I was completely like never would have thought could be a possibility.
Right, understood. The incredible thing about your story, obviously doing my research, and I've obviously we know your story and we've heard it, and I've heard you on other podcasts talking about it, is the mindset that you had from almost that immediate moment was, and I'm finding it hard to actually articulate this, but it's so incredible how you dealt with that situation, and you've since gone on to become a role model for so many people. How challenging was that, and where do you think your mindset has come from to be able to deal with that horrific incident? Because it's amazing just hearing your story and you saying you almost, like, we'll go on to talk about the fact you wanted to get straight back into a car, you wanted to race again. I mean, it's incredible to think how positive your mindset was in that moment.
Yeah, I think my mindset was actually one of the things that was probably most protected by my family after my accident. So my doctor, one of my doctors that did my surgeries was an ex-military doctor. He was still in the military, but he was working on civilian duties at the time. But he'd been out to Afghanistan and basically looked after soldiers in the heat of all of that going on. So he'd seen some really significant stuff. So in terms of someone to look after me, he was the perfect person for the job when I came into hospital, because he'd done surgeries like mine, hundreds of times out in all these sorts of places. But what he was really good at was just, rather than telling me what I'd lost and like from my accident, the fact I was double amputee, he was like, okay, if you like, this has happened, but if you work hard with your recovery, your rehabilitation, everything like that, you'll still be able to be independent, you'll still be able to walk, you'll still be able to do this, that and the other, and have a good quality of life.
That's powerful.
And it just changed my mindset. Rather than thinking, what have I lost because of this accident, is what have I still got considering this accident. So that was a really powerful moment for me from a mindset wise, of just shifting my mindset. And then equally, obviously, I'm a cousin to people. I'm a relative and a friend to a lot of people. And when those people came and saw me in hospital, my mum was basically outside the door when they would arrive to come and see me. And they're all like, a lot of my friends and family were, really emotionally distraught about the incident. And my mum would almost in a military way outside the door when they'd come into my ward, she'd be like, right, the doctors have said how you react to Billy is how he'll react about the situation himself. So if you go in there and you're, crying and you're all, like doom and gloom about the situation, that's how you're going to make Billy feel about what's going on to him right now. So she said, when you go in there, big smiles, keep it positive, and she'd drill that into people before they go in. So these poor people kind of see me in hospital and they get like this drilling, like, you can't, get too upset because you got to, stay positive, and that will sort of rub off on me and I'll be more positive about the whole situation. And it works, because my friends, my family would come in. Don't get me wrong, a few would crack, a few would cry and stuff like that. But in general, everyone came in and it was just positive, good vibes that they would bring to me. And just eventually that just rubs off on you.
Did it? That helped you recover, you think? The positivity was a key message for you?
I think so, yeah. Just surrounding yourself with people that are just seeing the good in what's happened. Like, eventually you start looking for it yourself. I think if I'd had loads of people coming in and, like, they were, like, reflecting on what I'd lost all the time, then it would have made me just think that this whole situation was a loss. But really, actually, there was a lot that I gained from my accident, because I gained the ability to still have a life. My accident was that severe, I could have not made it through that. So the fact that I'd lost my legs, I'd lost my legs, but I'd equally gained the opportunity to still continue living.
Wow. It's incredible how you look at that. So you actually look at it as it could have been even worse then, because you knew when you hit that car at 100 miles an hour that it could have been even more severe than it was. That's
I was
a big
very
part of
lucky,
the mindset. Wow. And in terms of the people that came to visit you, because you made a really interesting point about your mum there, the positivity, and I think that's a great message that we share with people, because I think there will be people listening to this that will be going through all sorts of difficulties, but positivity and mindset seems like it's a real key message for you, and we'll come on to talk about advice that you have for people later in the podcast. But I'm intrigued to know, how were your parents' reaction with regards to your injury? Because you said they instilled the positivity in others when they came to the ward, but how are they in the sort of aftermath before people coming to visit you? So I imagine they were the first people there to see you.
Yeah, they were the first people there to see me, and to be honest, obviously they were there when I came out of my induced coma and I was on loads of medication. I can't really remember much of what was going on at that time. I was seeing all sorts of stuff in my dreams and this, that and the other. But no, my mum she was really strong initially. Like, she was really, like, again, she'd had the mindset she was telling other people to have when they'd come see me. She would keep that as well. Like, don't get me wrong, she would have those moments where she'd need to let some emotions out and she'd be upset about it, but in general she'd stayed really strong for me and was just there by my side, like wouldn't leave my hospital bed, like all day, every day. I'm like, eventually I was like, Mum, you need to go out and have a shower and you know, do all these
just
like,
the practical stuff.
Practical stuff. Like, I'm fine. This is week 3 in hospital. I can do a night where you're not, you know, at the end of my bed until God knows what time. But my dad, I think, took it initially a lot worse than my mum, because I think he felt a level of guilt and responsibility that he was the one who got me into racing.
Right.
And because of that, I'd had this accident and I'd lost my legs, and you know, I don't think it took him a while to come to terms with the fact that he'd had an influence in me starting racing, and now I'd gone on to have this big accident and my whole life had changed. But eventually we had a conversation where it was like, listen, you might have got me into the sport, but fundamentally you got me into it, you got me to try it for the first time, but I was the one who fell in love with doing it. So you know, it's my choice. It was my choice to keep racing, and you know, it wasn't just you that, you know, me doing something for you. I was doing it for me. I wanted to be a racing driver. You got me into it, but didn't. It was that conversation which I think helped my dad that we had.
And it also, at this age, you're just to remind myself, you're only 17. It's a couple of weeks before your 18th birthday.
Yeah, so I turned 18 in hospital.
Did you?
Yeah.
So that must have been a challenging part of the recovery.
Well, I say that we snuck out of the hospital. This was about, I think this was about 3 weeks after my accident. I was in hospital for about 5 weeks, and we snuck out of a hospital and went to the pub down the road.
Did you?
And my mates from school came up in a minivan. One of my mates' dads drove them up because I was in hospital in Nottingham, which is about 3 hours away from home for me. Yeah. So everyone that would come up to see me had to drive like 3 hours. Right. But my mates came up on a minibus with some of my family as well. And we basically went to the pub. And my first thing I had to do on my 18th birthday, I was still in my hospital like clothes and stuff, is my dad made me pay for the round for everyone.
Did he?
When I was in hospital, because he was like, it's your 18th now, you've got to buy the drinks.
Cheers, Dad.
Yeah, I'm like, I've got a laugh going on here, but fair enough. And you've invited 25 people just to make it worse. It's not a couple of people. But
wow.
Yeah, no, that was it was a good laugh, and just a chance to sort of, you know, spend a few hours outside of that hospital environment with your friends and stuff, and they'd made such an effort to come to see me.
How special was that moment then? That must have been a real special moment for you.
It was really nice. It just helped to break up that whole hospital experience. Yeah.
And of course the support network, which is a theme that we actually talk about on this podcast a lot, but sounds like for you that was just imperative in your recovery, your friends and family. I mean, you said they're driving a minibus 3 hours up to see you, but I mean that is so important, isn't it, in your recovery?
Yeah, massively. Like everyone that contributed in some way by supporting me after my accident, all of those, like, you know, positive messages, or family or friends that showed up when you needed it, like without them, I don't know where I would be. Like it makes such a difference.
Yeah, and I don't want to go over old ground and repeating it, but what is amazing about this is that you have that mindset at the age of 17 and 18. It's just, I mean, it's testament to you as to how you sort of looked at that situation. Is that something you've always had, and that you've had since that? Because you're in your mid-20s now, and do you still maintain that sort of positive, it's not going to stop me doing anything mindset to this day?
I that's something that I've tried to continue as much as possible since the accident. It's like I almost feel like I've been given like a second opportunity at life in a lot of ways, because it's like this accident could have been game over for me, and now I've got like this opportunity to, you know, go out there and try and do all this cool stuff. And I've obviously done a few things since with charity and raising money, because after my accident, one of the things that happened is that someone set up a Just for Giving page for me to help fund and aid my recovery, my rehabilitation. And I know how important that was to ease the financial burden of paying for prosthetics and, you know, getting, you know, a good set of prosthetic legs so I could just get up and about, physio appointments, all of that stuff that went into getting me better again and getting that independence back, because that was a massive thing for me when I was 17 turning 18. That's the age where, you know, your parents sort of, you know, you're left to your own devices.
Yeah,
so
interesting.
A lot of ways.
Become more independent and
stuff.
stuff.
You get to spread your wings, and all of a sudden I came back from hospital and my mum was like trying to push me around everywhere in the wheelchair. I'm like, no, mum, I can do it myself. Really? And I'm like trying to push myself around by myself. So I was very keen to get that feeling of not being a burden, of being independent and being able to look after myself back as soon as possible. Yeah.
Do you mind if I ask you about that transition of going from able-bodied, like you said, to double amputee? What is the process, and what sort of happens in that moment in recovery, so to speak?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously there's a period of time where when your body suffered such trauma and, you know, there's lots of swelling and stitches and scarring and all of that, there's a period where you can't just, you know, effectively get your legs amputated and then get on a set of prosthetic legs and off you go. It's like a long process. And I think that was something that there was another racing driver actually that had a big accident called Alex Zanardi, who was someone that became aware of when I was in hospital. And he sort of reached out to me and said, you know, you're a racing driver, you're probably impatient. And I was impatient. I wanted to do everything at 100 mile an hour. He said, with this process, with this journey, it doesn't work like that. Right. You know, you've got to just chip away at it day by day. You're going to have good days, bad days. It's not going to be this sort of plain sailing. You're just going to get a bit better each day and that's it. You know, some days I felt good. My body felt, you know, it was starting to heal up. Other days, not so much. So the whole process and journey of recovery had loads of ups and downs in it. But I used that bit of information, bit of wisdom from someone that had been through it before, and just slowly chipped away at it. And it probably wasn't, I'd say, a good year after my accident that I was sort of walking around. And I think at that point I'd probably just got rid of walking sticks. I had walking sticks for the first sort of 5 months of me actually being able to walk about, and then eventually it was like, I don't need them anymore after about a year. Yeah. And I was just out walking around on prosthetics, and it wasn't easy, but I was.
How is that the first time you do that? If you don't mind me asking like that.
It's obviously a weird experience learning to walk again, like something that you don't think about.
You sort of take for granted, I suppose.
Before I had my accident, I would never think about how I was walking, my posture, anything like that. Like, because you just do it and it just happens. And all of a sudden you're recruiting different muscle groups to help you walk because you've lost your a lot of muscle mass in different areas, and there was just a lot of stuff to learn. It's a really humbling experience going through stuff like that, because sometimes I'd seen people before my accident walking around with prosthetics, and you don't, obviously having not been through that myself, you don't have any understanding of what that would feel or what that would be like. But that everyone who's out there walking on prosthetic legs they've been through like a journey, and it's not been plain sailing. So now when I see other double amputees, I try and make a point of like going up to them if I can, speaking to them, and asking them about how they're getting on, because I know it's not easy.
What are the biggest challenges, would you say, in your recovery at that period?
Biggest challenges in my recovery, again, just keeping that patience, like not trying to do too much too soon. That like you get a set of prosthetic legs for the first time and you're looking at them like, this is my freedom back.
Right.
Like, I'm going to put these on and I'm going to be like Forrest Gump. I'm going
Okay.
to be off, and like it's going to be plain sailing. But you've got to be like, build it up slow and steady. Like I remember there'd be days, actually I had to, after I had my accident in April of 2017, and then I had to go back in for more surgeries in July of 2017. So it meant another few weeks in hospital, and I came out of hospital, and actually it was just before the British Grand Prix, and I got invited that year to go to the British Grand Prix as a guest of Lewis Hamilton. So I went up to the British Grand Prix, like obviously he was my hero, and I absolutely like loved my whole weekend. And then on the Monday afterwards, we'd sort of organised this charity karting race, and we got a couple of what at the time they weren't F1 drivers, they were in F2, but they were like friends of mine, George Russell, Alex Albon. They ended up coming down for this charity race so we could raise some money for the hospital, because the hospital I went to didn't have a helipad on the roof.
Oh, okay.
So when I got airlifted down the road, and then I had to get transferred into an ambulance to then go the rest of the journey in an ambulance. So when I heard about that, I wanted to try and raise some money.
Wow, good for you.
For them to do that. And anyway, so I turned up this charity karting race, and basically that day the patience waned, and I jumped behind the wheel of a go-kart with 40 metal stitches in my leg from my surgeries that I came out with 3 days ago, and I jumped in the go-kart that had hand controls on it, and basically drove the go-kart around for a few laps and was like loving it. And then afterwards suffered a little bit, picked up a bit of an infection in my leg, had to go back into hospital. So it wasn't a plain smooth sailing journey, but trying to not do too much too soon and overdo it was definitely my biggest challenge, I'd say.
Interesting. How was your mental health at the time when you're out of hospital, then you're going back in, you're out, then you're going back in again? How were you sort of mentally at that stage?
Yes, it was tricky. I remember the first few months, just not feeling settled. Like you just like, I came home after hospital. My dad, when I was in hospital for 5 weeks, he converted the house. So I basically started living downstairs, because our house is old, it's all crooked, and he put some ramps in and basically made it wheelchair friendly for me. And I basically started living in the downstairs room. So that was weird, because even home was different. And then I'd, like you say, be in and out of hospital, and all those factors just just made me feel like unsettled. And eventually you get into a routine of things. I think I've found that probably one of the biggest struggles is just like the first few months not knowing what each day was going to look like. But eventually the physio started happening Tuesdays, Fridays. I started going in for prosthetic appointments, and your plan for the week started to get mapped out a bit more, and I think that helped me.
And of course, the amazing thing about your story is you got back into racing 11 months after your accident. How important was that for you, and how nervous were you, if at all, in terms of getting back into a car? Yeah,
it was something that I'd spoken about a lot when I was in hospital. So a lot of my mechanics, engineers, people from the racing world that I knew came up to see me in hospital, keep me company.
That's nice.
And when you put a lot of people that love racing in a room, together, eventually you're going to start talking about racing.
Really good point.
And that's what happened. We started talking about racing. That was when some of my friends told me about Alex Zanardi and how he became a double amputee and he raced cars again. And I thought, okay, like,
does that give you inspiration? Or it gives
you just put the the feelers out there in my mind. I was like, okay, that's interesting. And then eventually I was sat there in hospital bed, like holding a steering wheel up in my head, going, okay, so I put the throttle on this side because most circuits are clockwise, and that would work best. And trying to work out how I would drive again with my hands, because at that time I was like, I don't know how healthy my legs are going to be again, and if I'm going to be able to use them. So I was always just imagining it with my hands of how I'd make it work, and then that idea sort of originally that I was just having in hospital with like mechanics, engineers and friends. Eventually one of my best friends who was racing in F4 at the time of my accident, he was still racing after my accident in the championship. He actually went on to win the F4 championship that year, and he basically spent a lot of time at my house. Like we'd just hang out all the time, and then he'd have to go to like the factory for like simulator days. And one of the days he was like, oh, do you want to come along with me? I was like, okay, yeah, I'll come along. And I went and basically watched him on the simulator, and then the team he was driving for were like just chatting away to me like, what how's everything going, your recovery? And I was like, yeah, no, it's all going good, and I'm hoping I'll be driving a car for next year, like if possible. And they're like, what, you're driving again? And I was like, yeah, I'm hoping that I'm gonna I want to try and drive again. And they were like, okay. And then the idea was there of like, oh, if you're going to come along with Jamie to watch him on the simulator, we might as well try and get you on the simulator. So do you want to just, like, one of our guys can just convert a steering wheel with a couple of paddles on it, or like I think they actually left it exactly the same, but I just started using paddles that were already on there for gears, but they're not very good for throttle and brake in racing because you've got no feel. But they were like, we can do that for you, and you can jump on the simulator for a few laps if you want. I went, yeah, okay, I'll do that. And then it just went from there.
Did it?
I started going in more regularly, doing more simulator work. They started making some custom paddles and bits for me to go on the steering wheel. And then eventually it was like, right, no, if you're racing again, like we can see on the simulator that there's a chance that you could do this again, and we think we can make that work for you. Like, we want to be involved in this. And it just
escalated from there. And then when you're actually racing 11 months later after that time that you're racing for the first time, how are you mentally in that moment?
I think, racing 11 months later, it did feel like soon, because I'd only actually, by the time we developed all the technology and I was actually like able to test the car for the first time, it was only maybe 2.5 months before the first race of the season. So it didn't give us a lot of time, especially me who'd raced the same way since the age of 6 to 17, like 11 years of muscle memory. All of a sudden I'm, something that I'm very comfortable doing, the muscle memory's gone, and I've got to relearn how to drive in a lot of ways, and rebuild that muscle memory, but in a completely different way. So there was a couple of moments, particularly the first time I ever drove after my accident, where it was like the first few laps, that comfortable, happy place that driving a racing car normally was for me, all of a sudden felt like I was wasn't in control as much as I was before, and I was having to think about what I was doing rather than it just happening
naturally.
And that was quite a daunting experience. But after probably about 5 or 10 laps, I started to settle into it and started to not be pulling the wrong paddle at the wrong time, and
making, like learning a different sport, because you're effectively learning how to drive a car in a completely different way, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there was that complete relearning feeling to it. But after about 5 or 10 laps, I was like, okay, actually, this does work. And then I was already going, okay, this could be better. This is working well for me. And by the end of the day, I was pretty competitive. Like, I wasn't a million miles off the pace after like one proper day in the car. So it gave me a confidence boost of like, okay, this is, I'm not just doing this to just get out on track and like we're not going to be able to be competitive. Like we can actually make this into something proper.
And did you ever, the fear of a crash, does that come into it at all, having been through something so horrific? Because you said it's something that, interestingly earlier, that drivers don't think about, but after you've been through such a huge incident like that, does your mindset shift at all?
No.
Not at all?
No, I think the main thing that helped me get through that feeling that obviously when you say it, it makes complete sense why that would have been a possibility for me. But so obviously my accident was broadcast live on ITV4. So when I was in hospital, eventually, like all things, it ends up on YouTube or something like that.
Yeah.
So I remember watching my accident on YouTube, and I could watch it back, and quite quickly I just came to the realization, which was the reality of the crash itself, of there was nothing I could have really done to avoid it.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't, because initially you're thinking as a driver, oh, if I turned right instead of turning left, would I have missed him? Would I have been okay? Like you're assuming some sort of like responsibility for what happened. And then when I realized actually it was wrong place, wrong time, it was a freak accident, I couldn't have done anything about it, that like feeling just kind of like slowly dissipated, where it was like I can't change what happened. Nothing I would have done differently would have avoided me ending up in that situation and having this big crash. So it just helped me to kind of put it behind me.
So actually watching the crash back,
yeah,
and I've seen you talk about this, helped your recovery.
Yeah, massively, because it just desensitized myself to it. Like it was just, I watched it, I realized there was nothing I could have done. I watched it again. I sort of like studied that moment, which has obviously changed my life. But by realizing that it was a moment that I couldn't have done anything to avoid, like it was just, like I say, wrong place, wrong time. It was just felt like at that point, it was like I was just destined to have that crash. And I couldn't control that, but I could control what I did after the accident. So I tried to just focus on it from a point of view of focus on what you can control.
Yeah, it's an amazing way to look at that. I'm guessing though, for loved ones and family members, that they wouldn't be able to watch that back.
I think
right in saying that.
So, like I say, in reflection, my mum and my dad were, or particularly my mum, I'd say, was really strong when the accident happened, and then those first few months of getting me, through the hard, dark times and moving me into that, recovery and rehabilitation. And I think it's very interesting how, she was so strong in the early days, but then after I got to the point where I was starting to get back into more of a routine and my recovery had started to come, I was getting to the end stage of it. Then she was suffering more, I'd say,
Really?
because she'd put on that strong, I'm okay, I'm going to do this for my son, and he, me being positive is going to help him. And then I'd say she struggled with it more from that period onwards. Well, I maybe suffered a little bit more in the initial stages when I was looking at it, but then by realizing what it was in the grand scheme of things, which was this thing that was unavoidable, that I couldn't do anything about, I think that helped me to sort of move past it and then move on to the next stage, and actually like feel like the weight had come off my shoulders. Well, I think my mum probably, compared to me, pretended to, like it wasn't happening and that I was going to be all okay. And then when I'd got through the worst of it, realised that this has happened, and then it weighed on her a bit more.
Wow. Do you know, I think that's a really important message as well, actually, because we cover a lot of themes in this podcast where people go through adversity. It's not just the individual that it affects, but also family members. I think you raise a really interesting point there about how different family members can react differently, but also at different times, like you said. You had worst moments at different times, which is very normal in a lot of ways. Yeah,
I think 100%. And I think it taught me that the best way to face any challenge, any form of adversity, is to face it head on. Like, it's the scariest option out there when you're faced with something that you don't want to do or you don't want to face up to, is like you always just think, oh, I'll deal with it later. You always want to just push it down the road. But I think in a lot of ways by pushing it down the road, you give it more power over you, because it weighs on you. It becomes this bigger thing that you've been putting off, and then eventually when you do deal with it, it's this huge crash back down to reality. I think, by fortunately being able to watch my accident, I didn't allow it to be this thing in the back of my mind, building up momentum and building up, weight, that then I would have that moment where it would come crashing down on me.
But I have to say, it's incredible, and it's actually really inspiring hearing you talk about something you've been through, such a negative, but how you've almost used it as such a positive, but also how your mindset has just remained so strong. Did you have like therapy to help with your mindset at the time? Like how have you got to this place? Because I think it's just so inspiring listening to your story.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I didn't have any therapy that was offered to me by the NHS. So I was offered therapy at the time. I didn't have any therapy, but with the NHS. And then after I came out of hospital, and a few months later, I think it was the start of 2018, so it was probably about 8 months, say, after my accident, I thought, okay, maybe I do need to just go and see someone about, this. There's still some bits of this whole thing that are playing on my mind, or that I just like to get off my chest. And because my family had been so involved in my recovery and rehabilitation, and how lovely that was, in a weird way, I felt like it was something I didn't want to talk to them about, because
they burden them with that.
No, they've been through it as well. So it felt like something that needed the conversation that needed to be had with somebody else outside of the people that were close to me, that were still dealing with the effects of my accident themselves. So I spoke to someone only once, and that was just purely because didn't quite find that that right connection with that person, which I think is obviously a big important part of therapy. I guess my one thing, I do wish that I'd maybe pursued speaking to other therapists and seeing if I could find a better connection. I think in my mind I was 17, 18, racing driver, not much patience, and I kind of went to therapy once, didn't find that instant connection when I was having that conversation, and thought, oh, this isn't for me. Didn't maybe give it the time that I could have given it.
Do you know what? I totally agree with that, because I've had therapy, and it is all about finding the person you have a connection with. Just because you have one session, if it doesn't work in that session, doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to work with someone else. What are the challenges that you've had sort of day to day, can I ask, in terms of being a double amputee, that not related to racing, but are there challenges that you have now that where your mental health, you have good days and bad days, or have you still got that sort of resilient mindset day to day?
No, there's challenges you face. I mean, everyone faces challenges in day-to-day life. Like, obviously my challenge is like an obvious one, because I'm a double amputee, my legs have been amputated, so everyone sees me and almost sees the obvious challenges that are going to be present in my life. And I think that's in a lot of the ways where things are changing, and where we've maybe been going wrong over the years with stuff, is obviously how important mental health is, but they're hidden challenges. But just because they're hidden challenges don't mean they're any less important. But for me, I always get asked about how I deal with the challenges, and like I said, that obvious one is just being a double amputee, that it's not easy. Some days the prosthetics fit great, I'm able to go out and do all sorts of stuff, and some days you wake up and it's like if your shoes don't fit right and you got a blister, it's like that, but maybe like times 10. Wow. But it's like, okay, I actually just can't put any weight through my sockets, they're not fitting right. And all of a sudden you feel like you're back down to square one again, where you don't have that independence. So it's definitely an up and down situation being a double amputee. It's not all plain sailing, but like I say, everyone's got challenges, and I've just learned to I've just learned that these are my challenges. They might not be the same as everyone else's, but these are the ones that I'm dealing with, and just try to get on with them as best as possible.
It's amazing. I have to say, your outlook on life, it's amazing hearing you talk. You mentioned challenges there. Talk to us about what you're doing now, because I see you as an F1 pundit. We've seen you behind the wheel. We've seen you doing an immense amount of charity work as well. So huge congrats on that. So you've got a lot going on, and you've got your man cave here. So there's a lot going on in this room, I bet, as well. So tell us what's going on now and what's the future holds for you.
Yeah, so right now, doing charity work for me has been a big part of my recovery after my accident. Feeling of giving back to other people, especially after the love and support I received after my accident, it's been a huge part of my recovery, and it gives me a lot just on a personal level, raising money for charity. So I'm currently in the final stages of training to try and break the Ironman world record for a double amputee at the World Championships in Hawaii. Wow. So which has been probably my longest charity project that I've done to date. This has been sort of over a year in the making. I've been training for this since last October, feeling fit, feeling healthy. Hopefully we can raise a lot of money for charity, and it's really been a cool thing to be involved with so far, seeing hopefully the difference we're going to make.
Sorry, can you elaborate on that? Because we spoke off camera. You've undersold yourself there. Tell us about this actual challenge and the record, because what you are about to undertake is incredible.
Yes. It's an Ironman. So for those of you that don't know what an Ironman is, it's a 3.8 kilometer swim in the ocean. Then it's a 180 kilometer bike ride. And in Hawaii, the challenges with that are the crosswinds that you face on the bike. People get literally swept off their bikes because of the crosswinds.
I've been to Hawaii. Yeah, it's really, really windy there. Yeah.
Thanks, mate. Yeah.
Sorry, you'll be fine, though.
I've heard.
No, sorry, you'll be fine.
And then you finish it all off by running a marathon at the end. So the world record's just under 16 and a half hours. So I'm probably going to be continuously moving for around that sort of time.
And you're aiming to break the world record for a double amputee.
Yeah.
Which is currently at
16 hours 26 minutes.
And the interesting thing you told me off camera as well is the amount of double amputees that have actually finished this. How many is it?
It's only one double amputee. It's a 17-hour time cap on the event. So in order to become an Ironman, you need to do it in under 17 hours. Otherwise, you get dragged off the course. You're done. It's brutal, but that's how the sport works, and it's a tough thing in itself doing any Ironman. But the one in Hawaii is seen as being the most brutal because of the heat, the humidity, because of the winds on the bike. The ocean swim as well, where it's going to be lovely warm water, but it means you don't wear a wetsuit, so that has its own challenges. Right. So my life has basically been endurance training for the last year, in and around working on the Formula One.
Yeah, have you enjoyed that part of it as well?
Yeah, it's been really good. It's taught me that when you think you don't have any time in your day, you can find a couple of hours. And that's something that, we all get caught up in going, I've not got time for this. I've not got time for that.
So true.
And when you have to get 15, 20 hours of training in around work, around traveling around the world, you realize, okay, I need to structure my week, but I can easily find that time. So yeah, it's been a really cool experience so far.
And competitive racing, a lot of people ask you about that in terms of where the future holds. You've got your charity work, your punditry, racing as well. Yeah. Tell us about where you see yourself in sort of the 5-10 year mark.
5-10 years. I mean, it's been 7 years actually, or just over 7 years since my accident, and that's gone by like that. So yeah, it's scary to think that the next 5-10 years might go past so fast in my head, but I don't know where I see myself really. I like doing things that people don't think that I can do. I like
testing yourself.
Testing myself. Yeah, I like going out there, pushing myself out of my comfort zone, doing stuff in the hope that from me doing it, someone who's obviously got this obvious challenge that people can see, it gives people a bit of a boost that they can go out and achieve anything for themselves too. I think that's like been the driving force behind all my challenges and stuff, is like I love hearing stories about after me taking on challenges and doing stuff like that other people have gone out and done their own challenges, or if they've not been doing any fitness for a while and they've started looking after themselves, and like that for me is you only get one body, you only get one life, and trying to, get people to get active and to look after themselves and to really embrace life, like that's like the overall arching goal. And yeah, these challenges are just a way to do that.
That's amazing. Final question, which we ask all guests, and I want to, I've got to ask you this, is just what advice you'd have for people, because you're someone that's had incredible challenges, but you've gone on to achieve so much in your career, and you're still so young as well. And I keep going back to it, but your mindset, the way that you look at life in such a positive way is to be admired. It's really inspiring. I've firstly loved having you on the podcast, so thank you so much for being so honest.
Thanks for having me.
But what advice would you have for people that might be struggling?
I think it's like everyone says it a lot, and it's okay not to be okay. Like, life's not perfect. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. You're going to have good days. You're going to have bad days. Embrace the good and the bad, because if it was all good, it wouldn't feel as good as it is. And equally, if you don't have those lows, then the highs don't feel as high. And for me, like, a lot of the stuff I've done since my accident, it's been surrounding myself with people that believe in me. And then also the more fundamental one in a lot of ways is having belief in yourself. Even if you're suffering and you're really going through it and you can't see a way that you're going to get through it, if you just have that little bit of positive self-talk in your own mind, and you believe that you can do something better, or something healthier than the position you're at that current time, I think that goes a long way. If you don't believe in yourself, no one else is going to believe in you. So try to believe that there's better out there for yourself, and then hopefully you'll be lucky to have people around you that will start to believe in that for you too.
Mate, it's great advice. And can I just say, genuinely, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the pod.
Wicked.
Thank you very much for your time, Billy, and hopefully catch you at Spurs game soon.
We will.
Top man.